My mother had a dear friend, an elderly woman who lived alone. She was one of the kindest souls I've ever known, always warm, loving, and with a heart full of care. Every time we visited her, it felt like entering a sanctuary of peace and comfort. She had this way of making everyone feel welcomed, and her smile was enough to melt away any worries. Her house was always a frequent stop for my mother and me. We'd bring her homemade cakes, which she adored more than anything. It became a little tradition. She'd sit with us, her hands gently cradling a cup of tea as we laughed and shared stories. I loved those moments. They were simple, yet full of warmth, and I always felt safe in her company. She was more than just a friend to my mother, she was like family to us. Her affection for everyone around her made her a beacon of kindness, and her home was always open to whoever needed comfort or a listening ear. But one day, everything changed. She fell ill, and the vibrant, loving woman I had always known began to fade away. I couldn't believe how quickly things turned. It felt like she had been fine one day, and then, without warning, she was bedridden. We all prayed for her recovery, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It was a slow, painful decline, and I couldn't help but wonder if things would ever be the same again. After a long and painful illness, the dear lady passed away. It was a heartbreaking moment for my mother, and for me too. Before she died, she had given my mother a small, delicate table clock as a gift, a simple yet meaningful gesture. It was a token of their friendship, something that would remind my mother of the warmth and kindness she had always received from her. The strange part came on the very day she passed. As if it were tied to her final moments, the clock stopped working precisely at the hour of her death. It wasn't just a coincidence, it was as though the time itself had come to a halt in response to her passing. We were all unsettled by it, but my mother tried to brush it off as just an oddity. However, things didn't stay that way for long. Even after we replaced the batteries several times, the clock would always stop at the same exact time right when she had died. It was as though something or someone was controlling the flow of time itself. No matter how many batteries we put in, the clock stubbornly refused to keep ticking past that particular moment each day. At the same hour, it would stop. At first, my mother tried to convince herself that it was just a malfunction, a technical glitch. But deep down, she couldn't shake the eerie feeling that the clock was somehow connected to her friend's passing. It felt like a reminder, one that she couldn't escape, no matter how hard she tried. After countless attempts to make the clock work again, my mother finally gave up. She couldn't explain what was happening, and the frustration of it all wore her down. Eventually, she decided to leave it on the table, untouched, as a kind of keepsake. It sat there, still and silent, serving as a bittersweet reminder of her dear friend. For months, nothing more happened with the clock. It remained dormant, as though it had lost its purpose. But one day, for reasons I still don't understand, my mother decided to try again. She placed new batteries inside the clock, hoping that maybe, just maybe, it would start ticking once more. As she set it back on the table, I watched her, feeling a sense of unease, knowing that something had always been off with that clock. Still, she pushed forward, almost as if she needed to make peace with it. And then, just like before, the clock stopped. But this time, it wasn't just the time that froze, it was as if everything in the room had frozen with it. The hands of the clock halted at the exact same hour as when the lady had passed, a constant reminder of that moment. But what followed was far more unsettling. As I stood there, staring at the clock, something even stranger happened. The clock didn't simply stop, it seemed to fall apart in front of our eyes. Pieces of it, small and delicate, started to disassemble themselves, as though an invisible force was pulling them apart one by one. My mother and I both watched in horror, unable to explain what was happening. The clock, which had been a gift and a token of affection, was now in ruins, as if someone or something had purposefully undone it. When my mother placed the new batteries into the clock and set it back on the table, I had no idea what was about to happen. I watched her, feeling a strange chill run down my spine as she gently placed the clock in its usual spot. But then, something truly macabre occurred. The clock, which had been whole just moments before, began to fall apart right before our eyes. There was no sound, No warning, just a sudden, unnerving disintegration. The pieces of the clock tumbled onto the table, scattered in front of us. It was as if an invisible hand had unhinged every part of it in one swift motion. The glass face, the metal casing, the tiny gears, everything came apart, falling into a disordered heap. We both stood frozen, staring at the wreckage, unable to comprehend what we were seeing. It was as if the clock had been torn apart by an unseen force, and it was hard to believe that we were witnessing something real. I couldn't shake the thought, how could this happen? The clock was brand new when it was given to my mother, and it was meticulously crafted. It had no loose parts, and everything was screwed together with precision. There was no logical explanation for how it could have come apart so easily, as if someone had deliberately unscrewed every component. It wasn't the kind of object that would just fall apart without reason. The more I thought about it, the more I felt a sense of dread creep in. This wasn't just a broken clock, it was as though the very fabric of reality around it had been altered. Something or someone was controlling this object, manipulating it in ways we couldn't understand. The more I stared at the pieces on the table, the stronger the feeling became. Whatever was behind this was not natural, and it wasn't done with us yet. As I sat there, staring at the broken pieces of the clock, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. Was it just a coincidence, or was there something more to this? The way the clock had stopped at the exact moment of her death, the way it had fallen apart without explanation, it all felt too strange, too deliberate. I kept wondering if there was some sort of supernatural force at work, something beyond our understanding. The logical part of me tried to deny it, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was connected to that clock and to her death. The mystery of the clock remained unresolved. Despite all the attempts to rationalize it, there was no logical explanation for its behavior. My mother and I continued to be haunted by the idea that our friend's presence hadn't truly left us. It felt as if she was still here, lingering in some form, watching over us, or perhaps still trying to communicate. The thought alone was enough to send chills down my spine. Over time, we both avoided speaking of it too much, but the fear never fully went away. Every time I passed the table where the clock had once sat, I felt a strange weight in the air, as if something was still hanging around, just out of sight. We had no answers, only a creeping sense of dread that refused to fade. I could never shake the thought that something beyond our comprehension had happened in that house. Whether it was the lingering spirit of our friend or something darker, I didn't know. But whatever it was, I had the undeniable feeling that we were being watched. And that thought would continue to haunt me long after the clock had fallen silent. It was a quiet night, and I was alone at home. My husband had left for a business trip earlier that day, and now I found myself wide awake in bed, unable to fall asleep. The silence of the house seemed to stretch on endlessly, making me feel uneasy. I tossed and turned for what felt like hours, but sleep wouldn't come. Feeling restless and uncomfortable in the stillness, I decided to get up. I grabbed my book from the midstand and sat down in the chair beside the bed, hoping the light from the lamp would help calm my nerves. I tried to focus on the pages, but my mind kept wandering, each creak of the house echoing in the silence, making me more anxious with every passing minute. As the night wore on, the stillness became almost suffocating. The quiet was so deep, so absolute, that it only made my unease grow. The house, which normally felt like a safe haven, now felt cold and distant. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. As I tried to immerse myself in the book, something strange interrupted my thoughts. It started as a soft tap, 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 coming from the door to my bedroom. At first, I thought it might be my husband, returning earlier than expected from his trip. A wave of relief washed over me, and I called out, "Is that you, love? You're back already." But instead of hearing his familiar voice calling back, I was met with something that sent a chill down my spine. "It's me. Can you open the door for me, please?" The voice sounded exactly like mine. My heart skipped a beat as confusion flooded my mind. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of it. I hesitated for a moment, convinced that maybe I was just imagining things, but the voice, it was unmistakably mine, so eerily calm, as if nothing were wrong. "Who is it?" I asked again, my voice trembling slightly, but there was no answer, only the same voice, asking to be let in. "Open the door, love, let me in," it repeated, and the words felt like they were coming from deep inside me. I couldn't understand what was happening. My breath caught in my throat as I gripped the edge of the chair, heart racing. There was no way I was hearing this correctly. I called out one more time, trying to make sense of the situation, but the voice on the other side of the door just kept repeating itself, chillingly familiar yet completely wrong. My heart raced as I stood there, staring at the door, unsure of what was happening. I mustered up the courage to ask again, my voice trembling with confusion, "Who is it? Who's there?" The silence stretched for a moment, and then, once again, I heard that same voice. It was undeniably mine, but it sounded off strangely, too calm, too insistent. "Open the door for me, love, let me in," the voice repeated, almost pleading now. My stomach dropped, and an icy chill spread down my spine. It was like hearing my own voice, but distorted, as if someone or something was mimicking me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, but my mind was struggling to make sense of it. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot. My thoughts raced as I tried to rationalize what was happening. "It's just the silence playing tricks on me," I thought. "Maybe it's just my imagination. Or maybe it's the house creaking, making the sound seem like a voice." But deep down, I knew that what was happening didn't feel normal. The voice continued to echo from the other side of the door, now more forceful, almost demanding. "Open the door, love, let me in," it insisted again, and each word sent a fresh wave of terror through me. I couldn't help but wonder, was I losing my mind? Or was something truly wrong, something far more sinister? I couldn't take it anymore. My panic reached its peak as I shouted through the door, "Go away. Please, go away." But no matter how loudly I screamed, the knocks continued. TOC-TOC-TOC, each one more insistent than the last, as if something on the other side was growing impatient with me. My hands trembled, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest, the noise deafening in the stillness of the house. Then, it happened, my voice began to change. It started off sounding like it had before, but then, slowly, it deepened, becoming unnaturally low and guttural. The words became harsh, distorted, and filled with a malice that I had never heard from my own lips. "Open the door, now," it growled. It was no longer asking, it was demanding. It felt like an order from something not human. I backed away from the door, my legs nearly giving out beneath me. Fear surged through me like a wave crashing against a fragile shore. Every instinct screamed for me to run, to escape, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, as if the air itself had become thick with terror, trapping me. My eyes stayed fixed on the door, watching the handle twist and rattle slightly, and all I could do was wait for whatever would happen next. The pressure, the weight of the situation, made my breathing shallow and fast. I wanted to open the door to confront whatever was on the other side, but every cell in my body screamed to stay away. I was paralyzed, scared to move, scared to breathe, unsure if I was dealing with something real or a terrifying figment of my own mind. But one thing was certain, whatever it was no longer asking to come in. It was demanding, and that was far worse. In a final burst of desperation, I gathered every ounce of strength I had left and screamed, "Go away, whatever you are, leave me alone." My voice was hoarse, raw from the terror, but I had to make it stop. I couldn't take it anymore. The pounding, the voice, it was all too much. I needed it to end. Now? For what felt like an eternity, there was silence. The kind of silence that presses down on you, heavy and suffocating. I held my breath, waiting, but nothing came. No more knocks, no more voice. It was as if the house had swallowed up the sound, leaving me alone in the eerie quiet. I waited, unsure if I should open the door or if I'd find something worse on the other side. Eventually, I dared to take a step back, trying to calm my frantic heart. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight that had been hanging over me finally lifting. But even as I breathed, the sense of unease didn't go away. The silence was unnaturally perfect, as though the world outside had frozen. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking, watching me from the shadows. As I sat there, trying to collect myself, I couldn't tell if what had happened was real or just a manifestation of my fear. Was it a nightmare that somehow bled into reality? Or had something truly supernatural followed me into that room? I didn't know. All I knew was that the house felt different now, to quiet, to empty. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't truly alone.